With the global recovery well underway, it's noticeable how many destinations are adjusting their strategies and their products to be more environmentally friendly and, of course, sustainable. In this podcast, we travel the world, literally, to talk to Brent Hill, the CEO of Tourism Fiji, about how the destination is changing its marketing, the product offering, and most importantly, how it's recovering from a pandemic. For any island economy, air service is absolutely essential. And this is one of the few destinations to have both a long-haul local airline and a mix of inbound international services. I hope you enjoy this podcast. So hi everyone, delighted to be joined by Brent Hill, who's the CEO of Fiji Tourism. And this is the first time we've done a podcast where we time travel, because Brent is currently on his Tuesday and it's still Monday evening here. Brent Bula, I believe that's welcome in Fiji.
Yeah, that's correct, Bula. Very nice to be with you, John. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Now, you have either won the Australian lottery or you must be one of the luckiest guys in the world to end up in Fiji promoting tourism. How did that happen?
Yeah, look, it is. It's been a pretty amazing ride, but to be honest, it wasn't all beer and skittles early on. I came across. I've been with South Australian Tourism, which is my home state in Australia. I've been with them for about 6 years, and I came across the middle of last year. So we're deep in the pandemic. It was very difficult to get across because of the restrictions on travel, and we had a curfew at the time of 6 p.m. So when we first got here and we had to do quarantine, it was very, very, very quiet. I actually lived in a resort for about 7 or 8 weeks, and pretty much aside from a medical team from Australia doing vaccines and so on with the Fijian government, we were pretty much the only people there. So it was very, very surreal. But obviously since then, things have really accelerated, and obviously my first task was to get Fiji's borders open and then really start to crank things up. And it's been an amazing ride, and we're certainly doing very well now.
So let me get this right. You arrived in Fiji and you had a whole tourism resort to yourself apart from a few medics.
I did, yeah. So it was quite surreal. Like I'd go for a run. I'm out of quarantine at this stage. So I'd go for a run in the morning and I'd come back, and you can imagine those, huge resort pools that they have. And of course, I'd just be, lolling about in that, and would just call out to the, one staff member that, could I get my latte? And so it was surreal. It was one of the most incredible experiences of our life. And we had a couple of days where we went out on the water, and there's just nobody around, so you could just snorkel in some of the best spots. You could surf cloud break, and there was just no one around. So it was it felt very surreal, but of course we knew we had a job to do, and as nice as that was in terms of quiet and so on, we certainly are much happier now seeing everybody back in work and tourists enjoying Fiji and things cranking up again.
Mm-hmm. And obviously plenty of time for thinking. It's been an interesting pause in the whole aviation, tourism and travel sector for the last 2 years around the world, isn't it? And as you were pausing with your latte on the beach, what was you thinking about the future for Fiji? Because you must have come with a vision, and other stakeholders would have shared their visions. How was that shaping up for you from your early days?
Yeah, look, I think the one thing that because I get asked the question a lot, why Fiji and why move from Fiji to Fiji from Australia. And look, I think one of the things is that, Fiji, I could see that Fiji had what the world needed post-COVID. I think everybody, wanted to be able to have a break. They wanted to feel unrushed. you could definitely feel like I'd been in Australia through the pandemic, through a large part of the pandemic, and you could feel that all of that positive energy from the start of the pandemic. It's going to be a kindness thing, and we're going to look after each other, and that has sort of run out and been replaced by frustration, and I think people are just really wanting to move on. And looking at Fiji, I was like, well, there's such a great opportunity there where we've got these beautiful spaces. It's warm, the people are hospitable and still are, and it's just an unhurried life here. So from that perspective, I was like, well, if we can get this open, particularly in the southern hemisphere where people are going to look to take a trip that's a little bit different to just the continual travelling domestically that they've been doing through the pandemic.
Yeah.
Then I thought, well, even if we only have a few markets open to us, we can do really well, and that's proven to be the case. We've got Australia, New Zealand, and US doing sort of 93-94% of arrivals so far, but we've just started to see Europeans and Asians starting to come now as those routes open up.
Wow, and that reopening, I mean, it's a really, really difficult set of decisions that governments, everyone has to take in the whole process. How mindful were they of tourism in that discussion? I mean, it's a big part of the economic activity, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's around 38% of our GDP. So, when I first got here, I'd been having conversations with, the board and the Fijian government, probably, for a few months before I was able to get across to Fiji. And it was very, very clear at the time. It was like, look, the government said, look, we're going to roll out a vaccine program. We want you guys to push that. And then we've got to put our foot down. We've got to open before the end of the year. So, from that perspective, I think, one thing that I have to say is, I really applaud the Fijian government for, understanding and recognising that real balance between, the economic needs of the country and the health needs. And around the world, not everybody got that right and got that balance right. But it seemed like the good thing in Fiji was there was always a really open dialogue. That they were very much looking at the data and the science. And one thing that I was really pleased about was, we have these very, very regular discussions. The head of health would be there, but so would the economic guys. And, we'd sort of all thrash it out. And I think that every time we managed to get really pragmatic solutions. Uh-huh. And to be honest, I think it's amazing for a very small country, not even a million people, out here in the South Pacific. I think that Fiji, in the sort of 6 months that it took from, the middle of the year to the end of the year to get open, I think really just didn't put a foot wrong. Got it right the whole way through. Had people that were very dynamic and made key decisions. And, I was very proud of the fact that we opened when we did, because, there was a lot of places that didn't. So for a smaller country, Fiji's done exceptionally well. And
it's good to hear that, small markets where everyone has similar objectives can make those things happen. And you mentioned your major source markets at the moment, obviously Australia and New Zealand. That's not just tourism, though, is it? I mean, they are essential air services by the very definition of the word for not just tourism, but obviously for visiting friends and family, for trade, commerce, everything.
Yeah, exactly. Because, around the world, obviously we have Fiji Airways who do an amazing job, and, very commercial modern airline, a great fleet. But coming out of Australia and New Zealand, for example, in New Zealand we have Fiji Airways and Air New Zealand. And then coming out of Australia we have obviously Fiji Airways, but also Jetstar, Qantas and Virgin. So, certainly in those markets, all those other airlines, it keeps things pretty competitive. But certainly Fiji Airways has the biggest network. They fly in from the biggest number of ports. And the really, pleasing thing from an aviation side of things has been that, we've seen continual growth in capacity. We've seen, upgauging happening already and load factors being pretty good. And Fiji Airways are really starting to expand the number of ports that they're flying in from. So we've got 3, for example, in New Zealand that they fly into already, which is great. And in Australia, obviously, we've got Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, with Adelaide due to open in about a month. So it is great that even though we've still only got a small part of the world open to us, that we are seeing growth.
And I'd be interested, I mean, clearly you weren't there 2019 pre-pandemic and everything. But do you get any feedback from locals about the tourist and, you know, their profile, their demographic? Has it changed at all, or is it same type of demographic and demography just coming back? Or have you seen a step change in the type of traveller you're seeing?
Yeah, no, look, what's really exciting for me, I think, you know, I've been looking at the data, and I think one of the things that's one of the things that I'm really excited about, John, is that we've been able to sort of really grow our market in the sense that we had so many people that have been coming over for the first time, which is amazing. I think that Fiji, particularly in Australia and New Zealand, had the family market absolutely covered. I think people very much looked at Fiji as a family market, you know, flop and drop kind of scenario. Mm-hmm. But I think that, you know, we've had a real focus ever since I got here of really sort of pushing out a message about the depth of Fiji and the sort of exoticness, I guess. You know, even for myself, I thought I knew Fiji pretty well, but now that I live here, you know, I still have probably only covered half the country in a year, and I'm pretty much going out all the time. So even for a small place, there's so much to discover, and I think that's been something that we've really wanted to push out there, you know, to the Australian and New Zealand market particularly, who feel like they know Fiji, that actually there's a whole lot of depth to it. So that's been great. I mean, that means that we're getting a younger audience, we're getting some adventurers, we're getting solo travel. And I think COVID has changed things. You know, we are seeing like a lot of that multi-generational travel. So, mm-hmm. You know, things like if we've got villas or residences, as we call them, they're sold out through to the end of the year because you're getting big family groups or big friendship groups that are getting together because they haven't been together for best part of 3 years. So, yeah, we are seeing some quite different demographics coming in, which is really positive. It means that, you know, when you look at the charts now and you look at the data of who's coming in, it's really quite a broad cross-section, which is great. And
how does that pan out in terms of, you know, economic contribution to the island? Is there a noticeable change in the type of spend, the average yield per visitor, the length of stay, or is that stayed pretty constant?
Yeah, there is. So we're just doing an official survey now. We've just started that with the Fiji Bureau of Stats. So anecdotally, though, the length of stay is around the same sort of mark. So we were around the sort of averaging about 9.5 nights. So that's about the same, but the yield is definitely up. We're certainly seeing from a hotel perspective, the average daily rate in the RevPAR is stronger. Mm-hmm. I've heard from so many hotels that tell me that their F&B is well up, sometimes, you know, 25, 30% up.
Wow.
And that's not from pricing. That's just, you know, I think people spoiling themselves, splashing out a little bit, which is great. So I think from that perspective, the signs are all really good. And to put it in perspective, you know, when we open the borders in December, now obviously that opens for tourism, but also, you know, trade and business starts to ramp up again as well. The guy at Customs Service, who I know very well, the Revenue and Customs Service, they contacted me and said in December, we took 75% of the total sort of revenue coming into the country for the full year in just that 1 month. So,
wow,
you know, the impact of open borders is phenomenal.
Either that, or they were checking more people more frequently as they came through. How do you position Fiji that, you know, makes it different and stand out? You talked about the friendliness, the vast array of products and offering that you're experiencing yourself. But how do you articulate that to a market that probably already has a perception, hasn't it, of Fiji?
Yeah, look, I think the trump card, and I know this is going to sound funny, but the trump card is Fijians themselves. I mean, you know, we've been just through a process where we just appointed a new global agency, and you have a look at, you know, your Hawaii's and Tahiti's and so on around the world, Caribbean, etc. And of course, lots of beautiful islands, white sand, clear water, palm trees, etc., which Fiji has, of course. So you look at all of those kinds of things and you say, well, okay, there's a lot of choice. So why would somebody choose Fiji? And I think it very much is that culture thing. I mean, one of the things that's been proven, even after everything that Fiji has gone through is, how grateful we are to have tourists here, how welcoming we are of tourists. Fiji is known as being the happiest place on earth, and happiness is in our DNA. I think that's always going to be a part of our message. Our reopening message was open for happiness, which is a very simple tagline, but it's very true. So I think for a lot of people in Australia and New Zealand, it was certainly what we call near but far. So they felt like, they were going overseas. They were, the weather's different, the culture's different, but it wasn't that far away that, if something went pear-shaped, they could get back pretty quickly. So that side of things has been really good. But yeah, slowly but surely, as we get the long haul travel back, I think it's, Fiji's got that real bucket list, premium, positioning in the market, and that's helped by a lot of things. People see Fiji Water, see Fiji Airways, etc., and they know that, so they sort of think, it's this bucket list destination. So our job is just to say, yeah, it's bucket list, but it's really doable. You can actually get here. It's not too bad.
And of course that it's accessible, and that's an important part of it. You've got connectivity to the major Australian markets, and Fiji Airways are operating to Singapore, which is and will be again a major hub. But how's the American market getting there? I mean, you say that's bounced back strongly. I mean, it's a long way from the West Coast and an even longer way from the East Coast.
Yeah, look, it is, but I think it's point to point. I mean, so I think in that sense, America's one of the easiest markets to get to, because from LA, you jump on a flight in the evening in LA. If you're lucky enough to be at the front of the plane, you have a rest overnight, and the plane arrives 6 a.m, 10 hours later in Fiji. So it's like, in terms of flying time, connectivity, whatever, it's about as good as you can get. So I think out of America, it's very good. We've also got a service out of San Francisco with Fiji Airways, and there's the occasional flight out of Honolulu, and Fiji Airways is looking at certainly that North American market to continue to grow capacity there, and looking at other ports. So I wouldn't be surprised if before the year's out we've got another port or two in North America, because I think that's where we can get some real growth. I think Fiji's awareness over there is very strong, but it's just the how do I get there piece. So certainly if Fiji Airways is putting on more routes and more connectivity, it starts to go from Fiji's on my list one day, it's bucket list, it's this beautiful place in the South Pacific, to actually, this is totally doable, it's not that much further on from Hawaii, let's go, let's do it.
Yeah, and I'm sure there are many people who have looked at it and thought one day I will, and they will do. How does the accommodation stock stack up in that sort of context? Because, if you're 38% of GDP, major economic contributor, it's really a very careful balance about how you build more accommodation stock. Or have you got sufficient capacity in the market is seasonal enough that you can build on the shoulders, or you're going to have to put more accommodation in at some point?
Yeah, it's a great point, John. We just unveiled our corporate plan just in the last few weeks, and we basically set a target out to the end of 2024, which is to have 1 million arrivals in a calendar year, which puts us ahead of 2019, right? So that's where we're aiming. Now, to be honest, when you look at having 1 million arrivals into Fiji, which obviously means more arrivals than there are people in Fiji, that will start to sort of hit a ceiling in terms of capacity in Fiji, in terms of our accommodation. So, yeah, the interesting thing for us going forward is how and where those new, accommodation options come from. And I think, through the pandemic, I think sustainability has become a bigger thing, a really strong and important thing, as it should be. And what it's given us is the opportunity to just reset a little And I think what we'll see is that the product coming through has got more of that, sustainability push at the very core of what we're about. So I think that's a really good thing. I feel that, I think now you're starting to see corporates that are understanding, hey, you can't just go and whack a hotel up just anywhere and it stick out like a sore thumb or whatever. It has to be far more integrated. There's got to be plans to get about renewables and, eliminating plastic, et cetera, And yeah, certainly from our perspective, it's a real strategic priority, and we want to help out any of those projects that are coming through in terms of being as sustainable as they possibly can be. Because I think that's the thing. Fiji doesn't have a whole lot of high-rise. We don't have, huge towers. Most of the resorts are very integrated into the environment. We want to keep it that way.
And the whole thing about sustainability, it's one of the things that's come back really strongly, hasn't it? The desire for travel, but also to respect the planet and to be as sustainable as possible. What have you seen that in the first 6 months of reopening, that there is a slightly different mindset in the traveller about sustainability, or do they get on holiday and they just sadly forget about it for a while?
Yeah, no, like it's definitely there. The surveys that we're doing, it's sort of front and center. And what we see is, the interesting thing is, I think everybody understands that sustainability is a real hygiene factor in terms of it's just expected. But I feel like the difference for us in tourism is, how do we connect tourists to the sustainability work that's being done in Fiji? So our job at Tourism Fiji, and the way we see sustainability, is that when people are choosing where to stay or choosing what to do, and when they're here in Fiji, we want them to know what they can do. So whether or not that's adopting a manta ray, or conserving mangroves, or connecting with a village and doing sort of sea to plate or paddock to plate, that type of thing, we want them to really understand what are the opportunities. So we're really looking closely at that in terms of what we can do. But there's no going back now, and there shouldn't be. We have to push forward. We've only got one planet. We need to look after it. And here in Fiji, we're right at the front of climate change. We have, rising seas and you have variable weather patterns that we didn't used to have. So there's things like that we have to deal with. So the only way that we can deal with it is just really knuckle down and invite everybody to play a role.
I guess ultimately there will be a finite market size for you, won't there, that you reach, and it won't be 1 million, and I'm sure it will be more. But what have you any idea of what that finite sort of number is? Does the government have a number that they have in mind?
Well, I think, to be honest, if I looked at because we've only done the planning and deliberately only did the planning out for 2 years, if I look beyond that, if we didn't add any more hotel stock, you haven't actually got a whole lot more capacity. Maybe 1.2 might be you really tap out at that point, in terms of you'd be running very strong occupancy year round, right? Yeah. So from that perspective, that there is actually a cap, but there are some projects that are starting up. We've obviously got a few projects here where we've got renovations that are occurring, or we've got product that was halted during the pandemic. So we do need some of those projects to restart. Otherwise, there will be a capacity gap. But I think one of the really good things, John, as well, is there's actually a lot of capacity where we have a number of the name brand hotels like Sofitel, Hilton, Intercontinental, etc. And some of these sort of hotels like Sofitel and Hilton have actually got capacity on their existing sites and are talking about adding another 60 rooms or another sort of villa complex to the actual ground. So I think those kinds of things are really going to help us as well, where we can just have some of the existing properties expand a little bit.
Yeah, and I guess you can call that organic growth rather than new investment type sort of stuff. They know the market, they know the product. They're not going to tarnish their own brand, are they? That's good news. You sit, geographically, a reasonable distance from quite a few of your source markets. But you've also got some of the world's largest outbound markets for tourism that are increasingly and tantalisingly in reach at some point, aren't they? Places like China, and to a lesser degree Japan, where outbound tourism is already in decline. Are they aspirational? Do you want a part of them, or are they actually almost too big to handle?
No, yeah. So before COVID, Fiji Airways was flying direct out of Narita, Hong Kong, Singapore. So really strong Asian connection. We're just starting to see, Korean Air did fly here at one stage. I don't think that's coming back necessarily, but I think the Korean market's an option. But probably the one I'm most bullish about is China. I think, we saw China really rise as a lot of places did. Pre-pandemic, they had started to come here in pretty big numbers, and they got to the point where they were the fourth largest source market for us in Fiji. And I think, the good thing is where I was in South Australia, we did a really strong piece of work about being China ready. So we worked with all of our operators. We worked right across the industry for a good year to prepare everybody for a Chinese tourist boom and the kind of tourist we were targeting, that high yield consumer. And what we found was that was so successful for us because we had, direct flights in with China Southern, and we were getting the adventurous, high spending sort of Chinese tourist who was willing to sort of get out there and experience the culture of where we were. So I'd love to repeat something like that here in Fiji. I think, we've got, we're not really cut out for huge volume in terms of those, big volume group tourists, but certainly the FIT travel out of China that spends a lot of money, that's looking for slightly more upmarket. We have, properties that can absolutely fit their needs. And so I think in that sense, I'm pretty bullish about what we can do out of China. It's not, I'd call it mid-haul. It's not as long as your European trips, etc. It's still a long flight, but I think, it's very doable, and there's a lot here that Chinese tourists are looking for.
And as you say, it is such a huge outbound market. You can afford to play for the niche percentage share of great quality, because even then it's a very large market.
That's right. It's just so big. You'd have to look at Australia and, I can't remember exactly the number. I think it was something like 120 flights plus per week were coming from China into Australia. It was phenomenal.
It was probably overserved, wasn't it, if truth be told?
It was overserved. There was the number of airlines coming in from cities that you'd almost never heard of. It was quite extraordinary. But I think in that sense, here in Fiji, it's never going to be like that. But certainly, we've got those Fiji Airways flights from Hong Kong. If they restart, that'll be a great opportunity. And then we'll see what comes from there. But like I said, I think if we're getting that free independent traveller from China, they're going to spend a lot of money. Like, I was talking to only the other day, some helicopter pilots who run, these amazing sort of tour transfer helicopters over some of the islands, and made up about 85% of their business. The guys would come down here. We've got a few of those islands, which luckily enough are shaped like hearts.
Oh yeah.
So imagine, Chinese tourists love getting out over there, get the photo, get to land on the island and so on. So we've got some things that we know that a Chinese tourist is going to love, and we'll make sure we cater for that. And we've got great food and all those kinds of things here that a Chinese tourist needs. So I'm pretty bullish about it.
And the European market, seems to me one of the biggest outbound markets from Fiji is rugby league and union players coming over to Europe and playing for a couple of seasons. But that's going to come back at some stage, isn't it? That outbound European market, particularly from, the UK and probably France as well.
Yeah, it is. And I think that's a little bit of probably what we're experiencing here in the Southern Hemisphere, in the sense of, the first few trips that people from Europe are doing is in the EU kind of thing. Like, people from the UK going to Spain or going to Portugal or France or whatever.
At least they're trying to, yeah.
And over time, as they start to get more comfortable with tourism and protocols ease, then I think people will feel more comfortable about going long haul. So, for example, with Singapore, the capacity out of Singapore, we're up to 2 flights a week. That'll keep growing as Singapore really starts to open up. And of course, you've got the Middle Eastern markets, which aren't served by Fiji Airways, but that's obviously a real connection point for Europe into Australia and New Zealand. So that's real key for us. I think now that Australia and New Zealand are well and truly up and running and very much targeting Europe, I think Fiji can sort of tack onto that really comfortably.
And we've spoken at length about the aviation sector. What about the cruise market?
Yeah, so cruise is actually, the good news is we've got an announcement this week coming out. Cruise, we've been through a process there just to, work out the protocols. Good thing is, that should be relatively simple. It's just, going through a testing process before you disembark. So we should see our first cruise ship around sort of late August, September. That's the plan at this stage. So I'm pretty excited about that. Again, looking at that market, it felt like, when I was in South Australia, it was very well organised over there. Things were brought to the cruise, a strong volunteer market, et cetera, worked really well. I think here in Fiji, it was a little bit like, well, the cruise ships just come and things happen. Whereas, what I'd love to do is actually put a little bit more planning around it. And, I think that's the thing. I think if you actually plan around, cruise coming, you can actually do really well out of it and they can be very welcomed. I think it's when it's just they're ad hoc and they're coming, that's when you get the difficulties. But I think it's a strong market for us. We're made for it. The only drawback a little bit is as is common around the world, the ports that the cruise ships go into are typically big city ports.
Yeah.
And that's not really what the Fiji is known for. So we have to sort of get them in and then get them out into some of our surrounding areas.
I guess your helicopter pilots who've lost the Chinese market might be interested in some of that stuff.
Exactly. But it's just all got to be set up. I'm sure you can understand, John. I think if somebody just gets off a cruise boat and just wanders through a city, your experience isn't going to be great. Whereas if you actually have a whole bunch of stuff set up for them and geared right from the get-go, they're going to have a fantastic experience.
And we could talk for ages, but Brent, we've only got so much time, sadly. What has been the thing that has surprised you? You're obviously sitting in Adelaide, getting very close to this job, and were very successful and, secured the position. What was the thing that at that point you were thinking about? And when you actually got on the islands, you were surprised by? What is the one thing that hasn't shocked you as such, but you've been surprised by?
Yeah, I think, probably, John, I feel like it's probably been around the luxury side. I knew Fiji as being very, very strong in the sort of resort hotel side, had all their brand names, etc. But, probably the thing that I've been amazed about since I've been here is how world-class some of the product actually is. Some of our product Como Lathala, Kokomo, Royal Tavui, Vomo, some of these types of island, properties. You could stack them up against anywhere in the world. They're just so beautiful. The investment that's been made into them is really, really strong. So I think from our perspective, we're really excited to, get that out to the rest of the world. Australians are discovering that again. I think Australians sort of thought, if I want a luxury, island type experience, I'll go to the Maldives or Caribbean. And what we're seeing is Australian and Kiwi luxury travellers is really starting to discover Fiji. So certainly from my perspective, it's been one of the very nice parts of my role has been, to get out and see some of this product. And it just is phenomenal. Kokomo, Como Lathala, Vomo, the ones that I mentioned, they're absolutely world class. And, the food is great. I definitely think the thing in the past, the knock on Fiji probably 10, 15 years ago was around food. I think that's a thing of the past. COVID's been actually really good because, we've had a lot of chefs out of work, so they've gone and honed their craft back in their villages, rediscovered all these local ingredients, and understand all of that sort of paddock to plate, ocean to plate type stuff. So that's probably been the most surprising thing for me, and it's it's been great. I feel like there's so much that we've got to offer.
And from South Australia, what's the one thing you miss? Is it South Australian wines regularly beating English teams in any type of sport, or just the big city type sort of environment or moderate sized city environment you have in Australia?
Yeah, look, you pretty much nailed it. I mean, when I went back to Australia after being here very intensely for sort of 6 months, going back to Australia, it certainly feels like, it is huge, and it's the land of plenty in Australia. And I went to, I'm an Australian football fan, so I went to a game, 50,000 people. That felt pretty awesome.
Wow.
And those big red wines certainly, I miss that because obviously here it's more gin and tonic and champagne is the sort of cocktails, that type of thing. So yeah, there's always a little bit of give and take, but the good thing is it's not that far. If I want to get my sort of city fix and go and see a big band or a big sporting match or something or other, I just hop on a plane and get over there.
Brent, it sounds to me that not only did you win the lottery, but you threw the ticket away for everyone else. Well done, lucky you. It's been an absolute pleasure having a chat with you, and I wish you future success in what you're doing. If you ever need anyone to come from Europe and the UK to sample the product, then give me a shout, and I'm sure I can turn up in a rowing boat at some point.
Look, we love having people come over and discover Fiji and then go back, and we just know that people are going to love it. So you're very more than welcome, John.
Thanks very much indeed, Brent. Good to speak to you.